Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. Today we're going to be finishing up our V-BT10 FutureFights with our Gredora deck, which is our Megacolony deck that is coming out of V-BT10, which is the Phantom Dragon Aeon set. So Gredora is just like it was in G Standard. Gredora is kind of like a deck that limits the resources that your opponent has, and it does this by using something called a cradle marker, which is a new mechanic that Megacolony is getting out of this set. And when you place a cradle marker on a unit, it loses its power, its ability, and it cannot intercept or boost. And basically when it's retired, you get to search the same grade of that card that was retired from your deck and add it to your hand. So it allows you to basically make all of these useless zones on your opponent's side of the board, and then when your opponent tries to replace them or get rid of them by placing over it, which is still retiring it, then you get to search your deck for a unit, which adds more advantage to your hand while also thinning your deck so you check more triggers. So it is definitely a pretty decent deck, I would say. I wouldn't say it's like the strongest or anything like that, but it definitely can be very annoying in some matchups, and it has a really bad matchup against Shiranui, which is one of the future decks coming out. So definitely wanted to mention that because that matchup is literal hell for the Megacolony player, not for the Shiranui player. But yeah, we're going to get right into the deck here today. If you guys haven't already, be sure to subscribe down below and click the bell button so you don't have to miss any future Cardfight Empire content. Be sure to like the video if you like it, and comment down below letting me know your thoughts on the build, or maybe something that you've been trying out with your own Gredora build. I would love to know, and I'm sure other people would like to know as well in the comments below. Also, be sure to check out Let's Plays Animes, my second channel, down in the description below if you're interested in anime, animation, or video games. And check out that join button next to the subscribe button if you would like to become a channel member. But with that being said, we're gonna get right into the deck build today. So boom. So area, the first thing I want to mention is Cardfight area actually doesn't have a cradle marker card. Like, there's a cradle marker like card / token type thing that tells you what the cradle marker does, and it is like its own separate card. Area doesn't have that. It just has this thing where you click cradle and then you select a opponent's rear guard. So there's no real way to show you guys the cradle marker card, but I will go over what cradle does instead. So, but I will go into the fact that Megacolony is a protect deck, so obviously plays kind of defensive, and with this deck specifically, you get more and more cards to your hand through the cradle markers and just your natural advantage of the deck. And so because we draw so many cards and get so much advantage, I don't see a real point in running draw triggers, so we're running a lot of crits in this build, which makes it hyper aggressive as well. So starting off with our grade 3, which is for Evil Governor Darkface Gredora. This is our main grade 3 that you want to ride in the deck. There's no other grade 3 that you really want to ride. All the other grade 3s that we run in this deck are rearguard reliant, or good rearguards rather. And so let's talk about its two Vanguard abilities. The first one is Counterblast 1 when it's on the Vanguard circle during your main phase. And you may choose up to 2 of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle markers and put a cradle marker on them. The cradle marker causes that unit to lose its original ability. It gets its power reduced by its original power, so its power becomes 0, and then it cannot boost or intercept, and when it is retired, you may search your deck for up to 1 card with the same grade as that unit, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So obviously, for Counterblast 1, being able to put down 2 cradle markers, that's pretty good, because all of the other effects to put down cradle markers are heavier costed, in my opinion, than Gredora, so it's a very simple way to get cradle markers out, and then you can make 2 of your opponent's units useless to them, essentially. And then its second ability is when it attacks, we can retire one of our own rearguards, and then search our deck for up to 1 grade 3 card called to rearguard, shuffle our deck, and then if we called that unit and Gredora herself, get plus 10,000 power. So this allows you to go without having a booster behind Gredora and still be able to attack for a decent number on your opponent's Vanguard, and then also allows you to multi-attack, so you're getting 4 attacks a turn, and with Hell's Demise you're getting 5 attacks a turn actually, but naturally with just counting for Gredora you get 4 attacks a turn, and then that's why we run so many rearguard grade 3s in this deck, because you have a selection of what you want to go into every single time that you attack with Gredora. So moving on to our next grade 3 of the deck, we have 2 Intimidating Mutant Darkface. So unlike the old Darkface, which was the G series Darkface, which was a Vanguard reliant Darkface, this is actually, I think this card is better on Rearguard instead of Vanguard. So let's go over its 2 abilities. So the first one is Vanguard Rearguard. When placed, you can discard a card from your hand, and then if you do, choose one of your opponent's rearguards without a cradle marker and put a cradle marker on it. And then its other Vanguard Rearguard ability is when it attacks a Vanguard, you can counterboss 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards with a cradle marker on it, retire that unit, and then this unit gets plus 5,000 power until the end of the battle for each grade of the chosen unit. So basically what this card allows is for counterboss 1 for the second skill, it allows you to get power depending on what the opponent's unit is. If it's grade 1, you get 5k, grade 2 you get 10k, and grade 3 you get 15k. And basically when you retire the card with the cradle marker skill will pop off, and you'll get to search for the same grade of the card that you retired. So it's effectively a counterboss 1 for getting power and search at the same time, which is not bad. Not bad at all. Our counterboss can be kind of heavy in our deck, so you definitely want to make sure that if you are retiring that cradle marker unit, that it is a unit that you want to be retiring and that it's worth it, instead of just using it all the time. Next up, for our grade 3s, we have 4 strong toxic mutant Hell Demise. So what Hell Demise does is she actually allows for 5 attacks on our turn. She is a rearguard only grade 3, so if she's on Vanguard Circle, she does not even get a marker. So I hope you never have to ride this card if you play this build. I haven't, to be honest. There's a lot of ways to get grade 3s to your hand before you would ride a grade 3 in your deck. So you should never have to ride like Hell's Demise or our Stagger 7 as well. However, if you have to ride Darkface sometimes, that does happen sometimes, but you know, at least you're riding Darkface and not the other two, because they're way worse to ride. But let's talk about Hell Demise's skill. So she has 2 rearguard abilities. The first one is when placed, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, rest it, and then stand one of your rearguards. So the first part of the first ability, which is rest one of your opponent's rearguards, that never usually matters. But the second part of the first ability is what really matters, because even in Vanguard, when you have skills, if you can't activate the whole skill, you do as much as possible. So even if you can't rest one of your opponent's rearguards, you still get to stand on one of your own rearguards, which means that you have an attack order where you can swing with your rearguard, swing with your other rearguard, then swing with Gredora. Gredora will retire one of your front row rearguards and call out Hell's Demise, and Hell's Demise and Gredora will get 10k, and then you'll use the Hell Demise skill to restand that other rested rearguard in your front row. Therefore, you're getting 5 attacks a turn. So it can be very, very strong, especially when you're forcing your opponent down every single turn with crits, and you're whittling them down slowly, and then they're also losing their board in the form of cradle markers, because all of your units are starting to become useless to them. Then its other rearguard skill is continuous. All your opponent's units in the back row of the same column as this unit cannot stand during the stand phase. So sometimes, depending on how useful a grade 1 is in the back row, if it has like a skill on boost or something like that, a lot of times you don't even have to cradle marker that grade 1, because you'll have Hell's Demise, and if it can't stand, it can't boost. So unless your opponent has a way to restand that rearguard, then you use Hell's Demise in the same column, and that grade 1 just can't even stand anymore. So it's really good in that way as well. Moving on to our last grade 3 of the deck, we have 2 Prismatic Mutant Stagger 7. So this card is purely a finisher type card of our deck, and let's talk about its ability and why it's a finisher. So its rearguard ability is when it attacks a Vanguard, if all the units on the board are rested, then you can counterboss 1, and until the end of the battle, this unit gets plus 20,000 power. And then you can soul blast 2 grade 3s, and your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand and discards it, and then he or she can only call cards with the discarded grade from hand, which means that if your opponent wants to PG this unit, they have to drop a grade 0 and then PG and then drop another card. So either way, you're always getting 3 cards out of your opponent at least when Stagger 7 attacks, whether that's in the form of a PG and discarding another 0 or discarding another grade and then them dropping multiples of that grade. Now something else is that they actually can't guard this with a protect marker, which is another reason that we run it. So it's a good anti-protect matchup thing, because they can't discard, like basically if they discard a protect marker for the skill, then they have to choose something with the same grade to block with, and protect markers don't have grades. So basically you won't be able to block the attack if they discard a protect marker for this. So it's really good as well. Also gets 20,000 power, so if your opponent has to guard it with raw grade 1s or raw grade 2s, or even raw grade 0s, like if your opponent does not have a PG, it will be a lot for your opponent to guard this. And especially most of the time when you're calling this card, you're calling it off of Gredora. So if you account for its own skill and Gredora, it'll be getting plus 30k, which makes it a 42k boost. And that's not even counting for a booster. So yeah, very good finisher card and pretty good to finish off your opponent, especially in the late game where your deck is very thin and you check a lot of crit triggers. Moving on to our grade 2s, we have 4 Despoiling Mutant Sticky Bolas. So what Sticky Bolas does is it basically replaces the Machining Mantis in the previous Megacolony deck, if you guys are aware of that card. So let's talk about its 2 abilities. The first one is Vanguard Rearguard. When placed, you can counterblast 1, look at 6 cards from the top of your deck, and then you can reveal up to a total of 2 cards with Dark Face in their different card names from among them, and put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this is actually the first time that I read with different card names, because that means that you can't grab 2 of the same card name. So if you find 2 Intimidating Mutant Darkface or you find 2 Darkface Gredora, you cannot grab the 2, but you can grab 1 Gredora and 1 Darkface if you find in your top 6 cards. So just really we used in the early game just to find Gredora. Nothing else is really important. We don't have to actively find our Darkface if we have Gredora, because again we have that on attack search that Darkface Gredora gives us access to. And then the second ability of Sticky Bolas is a rearguard only ability that says when it attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 and this unit gets plus 6,000 power until the end of the battle for each of your opponent's rearguards with a cradle marker on them. And then if this unit's power is 20,000 or greater after using that ability, then you can draw a card. So that's very, very good because it only takes your opponent having 2 cradle markered units to have this card passing the 20,000 threshold. Also, you have cards in this build like Butterfly Officer that give power to rearguard. So if you use Butterfly Officer, for example, on Sticky Bolas, and then you use the skill of Sticky Bolas and they only have 1 cradle marker, this card will be becoming 25k, so you'll still draw a card. So it's just important to keep aware, be aware of what gains power and how so that you can always reach that draw a card requirement with Sticky Bolas. Next up for our next grade 2, we're running 4 Melody Mutant Nympha. So what Nympha does is has 2 abilities. The first one is continuous on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if a cradle marker is on one of your opponent's rearguard circles, or on one of your opponent's rearguards, because the cradle marker attaches to the rearguard and not to the circle. So that's important to actually discuss because I've gotten this question a lot. If the unit with the cradle marker leaves the board, that cradle marker is not on the circle, it's on the unit. So then that cradle marker is gone, and if your opponent places a new unit in that circle, you will have to use an ability to put a new cradle marker on that unit. So you are not always having the cradle marker on that circle. So basically, with Nympha's ability, if a cradle marker is on one of your opponent's rearguards, this unit gets plus 6,000 power, becomes a 15k attacker by itself. So that's pretty good. It bypasses the threshold of 13k force, so it can attack force Vanguard by itself. And then not to mention, if you have a couple 8k Vanguards in this deck, sorry, 8k boosters, my bad, in this deck. So once you're boosting that, once you're boosting Nympha, that'll be making a 23k column, which is a very good number to reach on Excel, Force, or Protect. So then let's talk about Nympha's second ability, which is when it's retired from rearguard by our card's ability, then we can Soul Blast 1, and then we choose one of our opponent's rearguards without a cradle marker, and we put a cradle marker on it. So this has very good synergy with Gredora, obviously, because when you retire it off of Gredora's skill to retire a rearguard, then you'll be Soul Blasting 1 to put another cradle marker down on the board if your opponent doesn't already have all their units cradle markered. So very good, helps you control your opponent's board as far as cradle markers, and helps you stay ahead of the curve as far as advantage. Then next up, we're getting into our grade 1s. We have 4 Cleared Breeze. So Cleared Breeze says when placed on the Vanguard or Rearguard circle, you can discard a card from your hand. If you do, you draw a card. And then if you discarded a grade 3 for the cost, then you can choose one of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle marker and put a cradle marker on it. So this is just a free grade 1. We like to ride this card a lot of the time, especially if we go second, because we can discard that Quick Shield ticket that we do get to draw a card. And since we only run, 8 grade 2s, we definitely sometimes want to take the discard draw just to get a grade 2 into our hand. Most of the time we don't have a problem getting a grade 3, but sometimes you still want to do the drop draw because you don't have Gredora or Darkface. You only have Hell's Demise or Stagger 7, which you don't want to ride, so you definitely want to use the filter ability when you can. Then next up we have 4 Disturbance Mutant Morsi Roro. So what Morsi Roro does is on the rearguard circle, During your main phase, you can retire this unit, and then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards with a Cradle marker, you retire it, and you can choose up to one card with the same grade as that unit from your deck and call it to rear guard circle and shuffle your deck. And then this ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once per turn. So basically what this means is that when you use Moriroro skill on a rear guard, your opponent's rear guards that has a Cradle marker, you'll basically be able to get 2 of that grade, 1 to your hand and 1 to the field, because Morisoro will put 1 to the field and 1 will go to your hand. So if you retire like a grade 1, for example, you can get a grade 1 to your board and then also a grade 1 to your hand, which is why some people like to run the grade 1 PGs in Darkface Gredora deck, because they can also search out their grade 1 PGs. I personally just run grade 0 Sentinels, and I don't run any PGs because we just create PGs with our Protect 1 when we go Protect 1, so I really don't need it. But if you guys are choosing to take out some grade 1s of this build and put in grade 1 PGs, then be aware that that's very good, because you can search it with Morisoro when you're retiring a opponent's grade 1 that has a Cradle marker on it. So next up, we have 4 Platoon Leader Butterfly Officer. This is actually an old Megacolony card that came out in some previous sets, but it is actually a very good card in this build for more than a couple reasons, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But let's talk about the skill first. So when placed on the rear guard circle, you may rest this unit, and if you do, choose up to one of your other rear guards, and it gets plus 10,000 power. And then if you chose a rear guard, at the end of the turn, you put that unit into your soul and countercharge 1. So basically what this means is a couple things. So let's talk about a couple caveats of this skill. So firstly, it rests itself. That obviously synergizes with Hell's Demise. If you attack, let's say that you only have 1 column, and then you play down a rear guard, like let's say that you play down Null Nympha, and then you play down a Butterfly Officer, you give 10k to the Null Nympha, and then basically you swing with Null Nympha, which will be 25k by itself, and then the Butterfly Officer is behind it rested, so obviously this will be swinging for 25 by itself, and then you attack with Darkface Gredora, you swing, and then you get Hell's Demise, and then Hell's Demise, if you want to, will restand your Butterfly Officer so that you have a booster, which is automatically an 18k column, which is a number on Force Clan. So definitely be aware of that. And then also, you still countercharge even if that unit does not exist anymore. So, for example, in the previous example where we chose Null Nympha for the skill, once we retired Null Nympha by Darkface Gredora, it's clearly not there at the end phase anymore. So at the end phase, it doesn't go to Soul, but we do still countercharge because it doesn't require that the unit goes to Soul to countercharge. So that's also a another very good part of this card's ability. Then last but not least, we're running our last of our grade 1 at 1. We're running 1 Turbulent Signal. This is basically just, I put this card in because I was having kind of trouble against Excel matchups, spreading Cradle markers to multiple units that they can make. Namely, Yasui was creating units faster than I could put Cradle markers on all of them. So I like this card because decks like that usually run more grade 3s than usual. And then if they do, it actually works very well in this card's way of advantage of using its skill. So during the main phase, you can counterblast 1 and retire this unit. If you do, you get to mill the top card of your opponent's deck into the drop zone. And then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards without any Cradle marker for each grade of the card milled, and then you put a Cradle marker on it. AKA, if your opponent mills a grade 3 off the top card of their deck, then you get to choose 3 units and put 3 Cradle markers on each of the units. So that's very good because it allows you to spread Cradle markers very fast. And in some ways, this card can be equal to or better than actual Darkface Gredora's skill, because it's equal to Darkface Gredora if they mill a grade 2. So if they mill a grade 2 or a grade 3, it is equal then or better. If you mill a grade 1 or a grade 0, it is obviously very bad if you mill a grade 0. But then again, you also got to mill a trigger out of their deck, so it's kind of equivalent in that way. Because you got to get rid of a trigger from their deck. And then if you mill a grade 1, then you get to choose 1 unit and put a Cradle marker on it, which is no different from, you know, Intimidating Mutant Darkface using its skill, or Cleared Breeze using its skill to put down a Cradle marker. So moving on to our grade 0s, we have 1 Young Mutant Warrectus. So what Warrectus does is, just like every other starter in the game, when you ride upon it, you draw a card, and then if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 1 or greater, you put a Quick Shield ticket into your hand. So obviously use that Quick Shield ticket for your discarding abilities, such as Intimidating Mutant Darkface or Cleared Breeze, or you can just use it as shield value, 5k shield value. And then for our triggers, like we discussed earlier, we run a high amount of crits, being 12 crits, and then 4 heals. So we're running 4 Jewel Flasher, 3 Jewel Flasher, 3 Sharp Nail Scorpio, 2 Shelter Beetle, 4 Scissor Shot Mutant Bomb Scissor, and then 4 Large Snowflake Mutant Snow Trick as our heal. So that is the build of the deck, and you guys will get to see the deck in action now with our Gredora games. So loading up into game 1, we're playing against Narukami Vanquisher, which I think is a pretty good matchup. As you guys can see in our hand here, we don't have a grade 2, so we do use the discard draw of Clear Breeze, and then we do get into our grade 2, which is Sticky Bolus. So we get attacked for 8k, we take it. The next turn we ride Sticky Bolus, and then we get a Intimidating Mutant Darkface off the top, and we play a Maurice Roro. I'm just gonna call this card Roro from now on. So we attack, and we get a critical trigger on our opponent, and our opponent no passes. And then we no pass our opponent back, and then we go into grade 3, calling out a Null Nympha, attacking with Gredora, and then off of Gredora, retiring, and then calling a Intimidating Mutant Darkface. So our opponent no guards the 30k Vanguard attack, and we do get a crit, adding crit to Vanguard and power to rearguard. Our opponent checks the heal on defense, which is very good for them. But then it takes the 32, so we're still dealing him or her 2 damage overall. Then our opponent rides Dragon Vanquisher and sets up with 2 Jagged Shot Dragons and a Volt Shred. Volt Shred attacks and then binds a card that he's going to lose forever. And then he attacks with Jagged Shot and binds our Darkface, draws a card, and then calls Shatura out. And then we choose to no guard the Jagged Shot because Vanquisher activates and gets 10k to his front row. So he attacks with another Jagged Shot, calling out another Shatura. And we were kind of hoping for some damage triggers here, so that's why we were no guarding so much attacks, but we did not get any, unfortunately. So we no pass that attack. We take in a Shatura attack, and then we guard the last Shatura as well. So then we go for Counterblast 1, putting 2 Cradle Markers on both of our opponent's Shaturas, so they get reduced to 0 power, and they lose their abilities. We use Mori Roro to retire his Shatura, so we get a grade 2 to our hand and a grade 2 to the board. Then we call out an Intimidating Mutant Darkface. And then I attack my opponent's Vanguard for 15, he blocks it. I attack my opponent's Vanguard for 12. And so the reason that I held back on using Darkface's skill is because I knew that he could not intercept. And so therefore on the second attack, I'm going to use Darkface skill. So we do check a heal trigger during our checks. So we add the power to Darkface. We attack for 22 with Hell's Demise. And then we attack for 32 with Darkface. And then we get to search a grade 2 because we retired that Shatura. And then he PGs that. So our opponent rides Dragonic Vanquisher once again. Uses Dragonic Vanquisher to Counterblast 1, make us bind a card. And then we bind a card from our hand. He calls out Bajan from his own bind, and then he calls out 2 Rising Phoenix, and then he calls out Cho-Oh and doesn't use the skill. He goes for a Mighty Bolt, checking the top 5, and then he calls out a Jaggy Shot. So he sets up the board here quite nicely, and then we take the first attack to see if we can hit a damage trigger, which we do not hit. He uses Jaggy Shot skill, and we guard for a 20k. Jaggy Shot goes to Soul and draws a card. He attacks for 22, and we guard for a 2 to pass. And then our opponent, we guard the rest of our opponent's attacks, leaving us with 2 grade 2s in our hand. And then we use Gredora's skill to go for Cho-Oh and Mighty Bolt. And then we swing Vanguard with Sticky Bolus, Soul Blasting when it goes to 21 and we draw a card. Again, the other one goes to 21 as well. And then we attack with Gredora, and then we call out Hell's Demise, which is actually what ends up putting us in a really good position to win this game, because we attack for 21 and then we attack for 42. So our opponent's out of cards in hand, and then these cards that are on the board, they only have they have no power basically, because they are Cradle Markered up. So something to note is that even though Cho-Oh attacks here, Cho-Oh cannot restand because it doesn't have its ability anymore. So this is just another good example of why Cradle Markers are good. So we use Counterblast 1 for Gredora to Cradle Marker these 2 rearguards again. We use the skill of our grade 1 to get rid of his Mighty Bolt, and we search a grade 1 and get a grade 1 to our hand, which we end up playing to the board anyways. So we attack for 22 with our Hell's Demise, and then basically we would have attacked for 12 after that, attacked for 22, and then retired and called a card. And so yeah, then we won the game because we forced our opponent way down as far as pressure. So second off, we're loading up Gredora game 2 here. So for game 2, we're playing against the Shiranui matchup, which is a perfect example. You guys will be able to see why I said in the deck portion of the video that this is such a bad matchup for Gredora, in my opinion. It's just because all of their units like bounce card and stuff like that, and that's one of the only ways to get around Cradle Marker. So it doesn't really matter if you Cradle Marker their unit because they're just going to bounce it, and that doesn't count as retire, so you don't even get your search, and they just get their unit back to be able to play it again. So we actually use Sticky Bolas, and we add 2 Dark-Faced Gredora to our hand. We go for attack for 17. And then our opponent no guards and then goes for his turn, rides Shiranui Oboro, and then attacks with Shiranui, puts his Shiranui into the soul, and makes me bounce one of my cards and discard one. He attacks and gets double grade 3. So we ride into Gredora, Dark-Faced Gredora. And as you guys can see, there's no units to put Cradle Markers on because every single turn, it's almost like my opponent has an empty board. So it's kind of just like, I feel like you should rush them down in this build because they also get a lot of advantage. But we attack and we retire our Vanguard booster to get a unit out. And then we do add a crit to both sides, so our opponent is forced to guard both attacks. And then as you guys can see, our opponent has hella Stealth Dragon Shiranuis here. So that's just OP in itself. Our opponent calls Tobitachi and then double Shiranui. Uses the skill of his Vanguard to counterblast 1 and discard a card. He binds it and then calls a Mask of Domination token. He attacks me for 22. I block. And then he makes me bounce 1 and discard 1. And then he attacks for 27, which he gets a crit and a heal, which is another reason why this game was so deep, because he healed down to 3, which obviously makes me unable to put as much pressure on him as I would like to, because I need to be able to get these 2 force markers out of his hand. So I do Cradle Marker the 1 unit that's on the board, but I know that he's going to bounce it, so I end up using Roro on it to get a grade 1 to the board and a grade 1 to our hand as well. So the one that goes to the board is going to be Turbulent Signal. And then we call out another Mori Roro, and we call out a Butterfly Officer, giving 10k to Sticky Bolas. So we attack with Sticky Bolas for 19. We attack for 17 to our opponent's Vanguard. He blocks that as well. We attack for 30. And then we call out Hell's Demise, restanding Sticky Bolas. And then we attack for 19. Our opponent does get a draw trigger as well. And then we attack for 22. Our opponent blocks it with ease. And then our opponent rides Oboro once again. So now he has 3 Protect 1s out. And then he goes for Magatsu Gale, and then he does a skill of Oboro to bind one of our rear guards, creates a Mask of Domination token, and then plays 2 Katarizune. So I was thinking about this, and the only way that I could really live this turn is if I got a 6 damage heal. So I decided to PG this in case he got any crits on his drive check. Then we decided to guard the rear guard with a 1 to pass, and we could have survived the attack if he did not get the 1 to pass. However, he did get the 1 to pass, so he bypassed our attack, and then we just took a damage, and we end up losing the game. So, as you guys can see, our opponent wasn't even close to losing the game because he just had so much advantage from, playing the deck the way that the deck works. So, I would say definitely watch out if you're a Megacolony player and you're going against the Shiranui deck. It's going to be pretty hard, bumpy ride. So, as you guys can see, in our hand here, we don't have a grade 2. So, our opponent, which is Great Nature, crits us. And then for turn, we actually draw into a grade 2, which is amazing because we were going to have to G-assist. And then we play Turbulent Signal, attack for 17. And then our opponent rides Hamhiko, uses the skill, and then attacks us for 14. We no guard. Our opponent gets a heal, but it does not heal because he crit us, ironically. So we go for calling Hell's Demise, and we call No Nympha. We then call a Mori Roro and a Butterfly Officer, giving 10k to Hell's Demise. Also, something I forgot to mention is when you use a Butterfly Officer on a grade 3, it also helps you set up for your Stagger 7 because you would have to Soul Blast out grade 3s for its ability. So we get a good little aggression turn here. Our opponent blocks a good amount of it and then also heals off a damage. He uses Isabel to check top 3. And then he calls out Binoculus Tiger, calls out Hamhiko, looking at the top 2, putting a Binoculus Tiger in the drop zone, and then Isabel into hand. So I basically made him unable to change this column after he used the skill, just because it's relevant with Hell's Demise being down on the board. And then our opponent plays Wombat and uses Counterblast 1 to invoke Isabel's skill and checks a crit trigger, so we take 2 damage. No triggers on defensive. Then our opponent attacks for 24, and we block, and then take this, and we guard the Binoculus Tiger attack. So we ride for turn into Darkface Gredora. We Counterblast 1, putting a Cradle Marker on Binoculus Tiger and Hamhiko, retiring the Hamhiko. Or sorry, we decided to retire Binoculus instead, and we call out Sticky Bolus. So then we call out 2 Moriroros. We attack for 21 and we draw a card. We attack for 12 into our opponent's Vanguard because we knew that we were going to be calling out a Stagger 7 here, so we wanted the boost to be there. So I could have possibly ended the game here very quickly, but my opponent had this PG that I didn't know that they had. So my opponent's now reading Stagger 7 and kind of realizes that he might be able to lose. And so this puts them into a tough spot when they're at 4 damage, because they also have to give real guard to your Vanguard column, but then they also have to be careful of the Stagger 7 column. So my opponent had a Palm Belly in hand, and we checked a crit and a heal. So we attack for 70 here. Our opponent discards a grade 0 and then like goes for a PG. So basically our opponent would have had to blow like most of his entire hand if he did not have that PG. So that's why we like cards like Stagger 7. So then our opponent plays down almost his full board down to the board, and then uses Isabel skill to check the top 3. Puts them back to top, and then his front row gets plus 10k. He attacks for 27 and checks into double front trigger, which is really swole. We take one of the 44k attacks, then we guard a 35k attack with a guard and an intercept. We guard a 44, and then we guard with our last PG in hand. So we go for Gredora, putting down 2 Cradle Markers, and then we go for Moriroro, retiring a grade 2 so we could get a grade 2 to our hand and a grade 2 to the board. And then we go for 12 into his 12, he intercepts. We go for 15 into his Vanguard, he guards. And then we go for 30, retiring it, calling out a Hell's Demise, and restanding our Stagger 7. And then we also Soul Blast 1 to put a Cradle Marker down as well. And then we check no triggers. Unfortunately for us, our opponent does check a damage trigger. So we attack for 28, and we try to attack into the rear guard too, so that we would be able to get an extra card, but our opponent blocked it, so that we wouldn't be able to do that. And then he uses Isabel's skill to get plus 10k to his front row. So we no guard our opponent's Vanguard attack because there's no way that we can take all this at the same time, and we actually hit a heal trigger on our 6 damage. And because we hit that heal trigger, none of his attacks are able to hit except for this Binoculus Tiger, which we would easily be able to block. So our opponent said GG, and that ends up being the game that we won in our favor. But that was the FutureFight Vanguard video for Gredora Darkface. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment down below letting me know your thoughts on the build, and maybe something that you've been tweaking around with Gredora. And let me know what you think about the deck overall. Do you think that it can compete? Do you think that it will destroy some of the other decks out here in V-BT10? I think that this deck is probably, I would say, B tier. But, you know, A tier is like, you know, Luard and stuff like that. That's really broken and good. So B tier is not bad. It's pretty decent, and it has a good matchup against most things, just not everything, and some popular things that it does not have a good matchup against. Anyways, if you guys haven't already, be sure to check out Let's Plays Animes down in the description below for my second channel having to do with anime, animation, and video games. And check out that join button if you guys would like to become a member of the channel and get additional perks. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on Monday's video starting the new set.